This is Internet Marketing. Brought to you by SiteVisibility at sitevisibility.co.uk. This is Internet Marketing. Now, before we start today, must talk about SiteVisibility's release of their 2020 PPC automation guide, which happened earlier this year. So it's completely free to download, and it's going to help you to get started with each of the new automation settings within Google Ads. So this includes smart bidding, responsive ad testing, dynamic search ads, and more. So the best way to accelerate your PPC growth in 2020 is to start planning today. So download your guide for free at bit.ly. That's bit.ly/PPC-automation-guide. I'll say that again. bit.ly, bit.ly/PPC-automation-guide. Now today I'm joined by Olaf Gueldner, CMO at Goodwood, the world's leading sporting estate, which is in West Sussex. Olaf, thanks for joining us.
Andy, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Goodwood, my father-in-law and my brother-in-law were serious Goodwood goers. Although I have to say, very sadly, I've never been myself. Obviously, I've heard about it. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing at Goodwood?
Perfect. I'll start with myself. I guess fundamentally I'm a sort of international B2C marketeer with sort of a marketeer with quite a mixed background, sort of having started out as a strategy consultant in New York for Bain, all the way through to marketing the world's biggest casino in China, and then somehow magically ended up at Goodwood, where I'm the chief marketing officer. And I guess the key red line across all of these roles in my professional life, at least, is sort of the idea of creating high revenue growth through a marketing turnaround, mainly aided by digital transformation. That's probably enough about myself, without boring everyone else. Let's talk a little about Goodwood, maybe, if you don't mind. Sort of, I guess you mentioned the cars. It's we always say it's a world-leading sporting estate situated in West Sussex, southern England. For those of you who are not in this lovely country, we're most famous for horse racing, motorsport, flying, shooting, golf, sort of hotel, 4 restaurants, etc. But most people know us really for 4 big events, which are the members meeting, Festival of Speed, Revival, and Motorsport. Then, of course, the glorious horse racing that usually happens in July, August. And all that together creates 1 million annual visitors. So exciting place. And I guess the last bit, which maybe not many people know about, but it's actually sort of the core of our conversation, is that we've done a massive transformation over the last 4 to 5 years through digital, both in general operations and in media, and particularly media bit I thought was quite interesting in the current climate to talk about.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I want to come on to that first, actually, because I guess, transforming or shifting your focus from a sort of physical to the online world is a huge subject. But I mean, can we talk? How did you do that? Can we talk about that a bit? Then we'll come on to the media side, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. I think probably when you now listen to people talk about the new and how it's all going to set up, I think there are lots of people who are used to just operating physical things and all of a sudden have to change that and become much more of a digital player. My experience sort of through the last few jobs is really that it's all around getting people excited by painting the end picture. What are you actually trying to achieve? And then break that down into distinct phases and sort of making sure people get that picture isn't available on day one. It might take a few days, few months, few years, maybe even at times. And then, being ex-consultant, I'm big in analytics and measuring, so you want to make sure you actually measure your progress along the phases, make sure everyone is bought into the different measurements, and then explain how much it costs and what costs are actually real risk of the things that disappear when nothing happens, but what are actually costs that only occur if you're successful, because people often mix these up, which is quite important to distinguish.
Yeah.
I think there are 2 other bits which I felt particularly good what I learned. So the structure is the first one. I think early on we're very clear what we're good in, what we're bad in. We're quite good in sort of having huge passion for motorsport, creating that media and being quite different. But I think we probably weren't the best in terms of distribution. So we hired in a third-party agency that helped us. And only over the process of 4 years actually went from 100% third party to 100% in-house, which was an interesting journey. And then last but not least, really, it's about sort of live and learn, test, and admit when you've done a mistake. So as again, sort of look back at Goodwood, we now have 350 million views across the year, 3 million followers, sort of 4.5% engagement is crazy good numbers. But early on, we sort of got a couple of things wrong, and sort of being able to admit that and then change direction probably is one of the reasons it's going so well now.
Fantastic. Now, I want to talk briefly about content. I'm assuming that you are sort of feeling that content is probably as important as audience. Would that be fair to say?
Well, we have this thing we say. We sort of, my personal saying is sort of audience is king, but content is everything, which is, I guess, to some extent saying they're both really important.
Yeah.
And maybe, and maybe just going into those two bits first, and then I sort of maybe have one or two other ideas. So I'm an audience. I always, in the old days, obviously, said content is king, but I think one of my learnings lately is that it's all about understanding the audience, sort of who are they, and it's just obviously the obvious stuff from demographics to everything else you nowadays can know about the audience, but really sort of motivation as well around why do they interact with you, what situation are they actually in, what are they after, what they're trying to solve, what they're trying to get help with, what they're trying to buy, what products are they currently consuming, and then obviously last but not least, what media do they actually consume? And then in my head, it's almost the second step to then think about what content to produce against that. And if I give you an example from Goodwood, we're obviously known for motorsport, and we produce lots of lovely, very niche, extraordinarily expert-produced motorsport coverage. But at the same time, we also cover sort of massive events like the Jetpack Man at Festival Speed, or our lovely kids race at Revival, which is called Setting Cup, which got sort of 500 million views last year alone. And it's really, the nice thing nowadays is you can actually produce these content pieces in parallel. And if you're into specific motorsport details and you look for that and you search for that and you find it, and if you just happen to stumble across our lovely sort of slightly more mass content, then you do that, and almost these two different segments can live in parallel.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about measuring, and I'm just wondering, in your mind, how important is that, and how do you do it?
I think the nice thing of digital is that you can measure most things, and sort of even if you can, you probably have a pretty close assumption where it could go. So I'm a big fan of measuring it. I'm a big fan of explaining to people beforehand why specific aspects are more important than other, and that could change throughout the different phases that I explained earlier. And then really being honest and getting almost someone else to measure against it, and having third-party analytics that I would say you don't want to be the one who marks their own homework and somewhat biased towards being more positive than not. So again, if I think about it, at Goodwood, for example, we've had very different criteria across the different phases. Early on was actually creating capabilities. So how many videos did we produce in a given time? How much money we spent on them? And then over time, only did we think about the gaining new audiences, and then did we worry about engagement, dwell time, etc. So that's the first bit around analytics. The second one is that obviously with content, you have a huge debate. People watch different TV shows, different kind of newspapers. And as you've defined what your brand and your media wants to stand for, you almost let the customer decide what he or she is actually interacting with. So it's very important to measure what content is being viewed, what are the pieces that people actually engage with, what are people that almost gets no views, and just because we like it doesn't mean you should produce more of that. It's actually the opposite. And then obviously the trade-off between how much effort you put into a specific piece versus how much engagement, how much views you're actually getting. And then the only other thing that we've learned is that you want to have a few brand pieces, i.e. things that really illustrate what you want to stand for as a brand and media player, and then push them out across the various channels. Which, by the way, actually is a good point I mentioned earlier about distribution. In my head is key to all of this. There's so quite a few people who produce beautiful content and forget to distribute them. So when I say distribute, it's obviously nowadays your email marketing, it's your social, it's your influencer. I'm a big fan of sort of what I call Goodwood style influencer marketing, where you produce and create a platform for these influencers to produce their own content, but you actually have a non-commercial relationship and just get them to enjoy and love Goodwood, produce their content and endorse your brand in the process. Sorry, that's a very long answer to a very short question there.
No, that was a great answer. I want to come back to something there, because I think in the first question you just mentioned you had to bring, and I forget which service it was now, but you mentioned about one of your services that was being done by an agency, and then you had to bring it in-house. I was just wondering if we could just drill down briefly into lessons learned. I mean, how do you bring, what are the main sort of areas to consider when you want to bring a service in-house that you were outsourcing to an agency?
Well, I think first of all, be really honest about things you can and things you can't do. So there is a lot of horrible case studies where people think they're good in one aspect and actually are not, and then ruin the overall project just by pretending to be good at it. Secondly, then I think very carefully choose specialists. I'm never a massive fan of having generalist support, because by default you pull in third parties because they are the expert in a specific area. So make sure you really understand this, do your homework with checking with other people they're working with, etc. And then I guess as you pull them in, make sure you have the right setup internally to actually learn from what they're doing for you, adjust it to your own organization, and over time hopefully be able to do it in-house, which in my eyes at least is almost a slightly preferred setup versus having too many agencies around.
Yeah, sure. So some final thoughts, Olaf. What can our listeners go away with today? What would your top takeaway tip be, or tips?
Top takeaway, I mean, sort of slightly topical with everything that's going on in the crazy world, but in my head it's sort of what I call embrace the change and assume it's here to stay, and try to do two things really well at the moment, which is one, to manage your existing business as profitably as possible. And on purpose say profitably because it's not as cheap, because I think it feels a bit like there are lots of people who are throwing the famous baby out with the bathwater, but you sort of want to be careful you don't save costs left, right, and center that then kills your business both now and in the future. And the second bit is, I think, this constant innovation and the idea that you have to develop new businesses that react to the different environment, and almost have different scenario planning where the core business as you know it doesn't exist anymore, and then start thinking about what capabilities you have and how you can use this to further your business you're working for that you own. So part of that for us, for example, is why the media is so important for Goodwood, because we've, obviously everyone knows us for events, but we hopefully have a second leg to stand on as the digital world becomes more and more important.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Olaf. What's the best way for our listeners to find out a bit more about you and a bit more about Goodwood?
Yeah, Goodwood sort of, obviously our website has lots of details. If you want to see what we've done as our media business, then go on goodwood.com/GRNR. And to get in touch, just drop me a line under olaf.gueldner@goodwood.com.
Fantastic. And your surname is spelled, just because that's Olaf.Gueldner, is spelled Gueldner. Have I got that right?
That's the one. Good old German.
Yes, that sounds about right. Yeah, good. Okay, well, thanks so much for coming on. And thanks, everyone, for listening. The show notes will be in the usual place, which is, of course, sitevisibility.co.uk/IM podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review. That would be great. Hopefully a good one. Reviews are always good because it helps us to get out and, more people listen to us. Questions and suggestions. Well, the email is podcast@sitevisibility.co.uk. You can always tweet at SiteVisibility. If you go to LinkedIn, there's a Site Visibility group on there as well. So that's all from me, Andy. And it's all from Olaf.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Internet Marketing.